Okay, let's see.
Welcome everyone to our October Community Forum, which is brought to you by the Council for Inclusive Excellence, held last Wednesday of every month. Thank you for making time to be here with us today. I am Erin Chanel, and I work with Gloria Noronha and for you all in the DEI office for my MAOP field placement. And this month we are inviting Dr. Elana Wolkoff to present on having difficult conversations and making them productive. Dr. Wolkoff is one of our own. She is an associate professor and associate director of field education in the Department of Psychology here at William James. She is a certified school psychologist and a licensed educational psychologist, earning her doctorate in school psychology from Northern University. Since completing her pre-doctoral internship, Dr. Wolkoff has engaged in a wide range of professional roles, including 15 years as practicing school psychologist for Cambridge and Wellesley Public Schools. She is a founding member and director of student support services at Boston Collegiate Charter School for clinical and special education, and a clinical and special education consultant to Boston area charter schools, and a faculty member both at Northeastern University and again here at William James. So please join me in welcoming today Dr. Wolkoff.
Okay, can everybody see the slide? So I'm very excited to be here today, and I want to say, this conversation, obviously, in some ways, like Shelley was just saying, it may feel particularly relevant in current times because I think there have been a lot of difficult conversations, but it's certainly not limited to this time, that difficult conversations are ever present, particularly if we're trying to get things done. And pushing things forward. So if people want to just, I only have one poll here, so if you feel like you don't want to deal with this, that's okay too. But if you want to just text to 22333 on your phones, text Elana Wolkoff 326. I have one poll question that I'll ask. So if people could just take a second to do that. And here's the poll question, is just what was the topic of a recent difficult conversation that you engaged in or that you were thinking about? Maybe you saw one or you peripherally involved in one. And this will be anonymous, so there's no names associated with it. Okay. Great. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So just take a look at those. There's a wide range of topics, and I think, if people look at them, they might trigger memories of other difficult conversations that you've had in over weeks, months, years. Yeah, politics, COVID, I think those are playing out a lot, but we also see things about the election. We see things about supporting educators, racism, appropriate behavior under different circumstances, hiring issues, ethical dilemmas, ethical conflicts, boundaries. So there's a lot of different things, and around schools. And, of course, my background is in schools. And one of the reasons that I am so fascinated about difficult conversations is because the number of difficult conversations in schools are pretty much endless. Between children, between adults and children, between adults and parents, between faculty and parents, between faculty and administration, between faculty together. It's really endless. And truthfully, in any work environment or family environment, there's no end to the opportunities for difficult conversations. So one of the things that we're going to, that we need to hold on to is that, and I think people have seen this this image in a lot of different discussions, but that in a difficult conversation, what's really happening is generally not obvious on the surface. And so we have what the focus is of the conversation in terms of the words that we're using and what we're saying to each other and even how we're reacting to each other, but then there's all of the multiple layers underneath. Anxiety plays a huge role in determining interpersonal dynamics, especially in difficult conversations. When people react with unexpectedly strong emotion, we want to consider whether they may be experiencing anxiety. So sometimes you enter a conversation, you think it's going to be pretty straightforward, and the other person has a huge reaction. Or sometimes somebody raises something with you, and you feel yourself internally having a large reaction, and they're kind of looking at you like, well, what's the big deal? And you're like, what is wrong with them? How could they not see that this is a big deal? So we often miss each other. And part of the reason is that there's anxiety on one or both of our parts. So when we have anxiety, what happens? Well, we know about the physiological stress symptoms that are involved with anxiety, right? The faster breathing and the tension and, the shallower breathing, your heart starts beating a little faster. Or you sit up a little bit in your seat, you kind of look at the other, all of the physiological symptoms that we know about through psychology and medical responses. But we also, in terms of our thinking, we also know that anxiety causes people to have black and white thinking and to be more irritable and defensive and reactive and to have poor emotional self-regulation and to not be good problem solvers is, one of the things that happens as all of these different impacts on our mental and physical functioning happen, we decrease in our ability to solve problems and to think clearly and rationally. So why are we anxious? What makes us anxious in conversations? Well, this is not an exhaustive list, but I think it includes a fair number of situations. So there's loss of power, control, support, and resources. A lot of times somebody proposes something new, like I could think about in a school or in a work setting. Somebody says, oh, we have this new initiative. It seems great. It's going to solve all of our problems. Well, there's somebody in that work situation who's going to become somewhat disempowered by that. They're going to become disempowered because maybe they were really good at what was being done before, and they are now feel incompetent, or maybe they felt like they really had some leadership in the initiative that was being used before or the strategy that was used before. And now they feel like they're losing that power. So there's always, we really want to think about, is somebody losing or perceiving or anticipating that they may lose some power, control, or do they fear that they'll lose support? And again, these are fears, so it's anticipated losses. It's not necessarily that the losses actually happened, but is there some reason in that situation that one of the people is fearing the loss of power, control, support from somebody else that they're counting on, resources that they're counting on? Sometimes people fear the loss of a relationship. They fear that if there's tension in this dynamic, you won't like me anymore. You won't respect me anymore. You won't care about me anymore. So is that a source of anxiety? Are there changes that are anticipated by this conversation? And subsequently, like we were talking about before, something that's new and uncomfortable that you don't feel as competent with? Are people afraid of being misunderstood, or are they actually being misunderstood? And sometimes they are, right? People are being misunderstood, or they think they're being misunderstood, and they get anxious and fearful because they feel like they're not being seen for who they are. I'm going to get to a threat to identity last, because I feel like that feels very important to me, and I want to talk about that for a minute. But I'm going to skip that one. Being treated unjustly, self-protection of themselves, their children, their family, their loved ones, somebody that they feel protective of for some reason. They feel like they have to stand up for them. Is that something that somebody's feeling? And I have to say, I keep saying they, meaning the other person, but these are things we all need to be thinking about for ourselves too. Because when we feel ourselves start to get anxious and all have those indications that we're anxious in a conversation, and that we're being reactive and a little bit defensive and getting kind of agitated, we also need to think in ourselves, are we experiencing any of these things? These fears, these anxieties? Is there a challenge to fundamental values or beliefs? So one of the things about your fundamental values and beliefs being challenged is that values and beliefs aren't necessarily logical. They're just what we feel in our gut. It's very visceral, right? And so what we try to do in a conversation is be logical and rational. But really, our values and beliefs are not based entirely, they're logical pieces. We think they make sense, but a very fundamental piece of them is visceral. And so to have those challenged feels like a visceral violation. And there isn't always a logical argument that we can make to their values and beliefs that counter them. And so we need to think about that too. Being perceived as having malintent can get people very anxious and uncomfortable. So do you feel like in the conversation, the person thinks something bad about you, like you're coming in with this very positive intent, you're feeling like, I only want what's best. Are they seeing you in a negative light? And that is going to raise our anxiety, because we all want to be seen in as a positive light. We all think we're good people. We all think we're bringing our best to the table, and nobody wants to be perceived as having malintent. I have two. One of those was supposed to be something different, but I have two fundamental beliefs. I guess I thought those were important. I want to get now to a threat to identity, because I actually feel like this is present in so many different situations where there's a difficult conversation and where the conversation gets really unproductive. Is we, again, and this is somewhat related to the malintent piece, is that we see ourselves as like I see myself as a competent professional. I see myself as a good mother. I see myself as a good partner. I see myself as a good friend. These are part of my identity, and I feel good about those parts of my identity. So if I'm engaging with somebody, and I perceive that they see something different, they think that I did something wrong in my parenting, or they think that I didn't handle something well at work, I can get very anxious and uncomfortable, because you're threatening something so fundamental to my identity that it's really anxiety producing. And I think that happens more often than we realize. I'm going to ask people, actually, I didn't do a poll about this, but I might ask people to put in the chat. Is the chat open, Gloria or Erin?
The chat is open.
Yeah. Could people just put into the chat if any of these stand out for you in terms of the recent difficult conversations that you're thinking about? Thank you. So some of the ones that people have written are loss of control, loss of resources, feeling being misunderstood, Somebody said the ability to fulfill my responsibilities. So not necessarily exactly these, but the ability to actually do what you're expected to do, I guess, what that would be. Constant changing, so the issue of constant frequent change, and crisis management, challenge to fundamental beliefs and values, perceived as having malintent, being perceived as having malintent, somebody else said, values and beliefs, somebody else said, a threat to identity and fundamental beliefs, threat to identity, having fundamental beliefs, values, challenges to fundamental beliefs, value, somebody else said values, malintent, and what being perceived as having malintent, differing values and identities. So it seems like a lot loss of control with the uncertainness of the pandemic, and I think that's a big one too. And I do think a lot of people, we've seen a lot of people really respond to the pandemic with anxiety, and it's definitely that loss of control that we have about the circumstances and things that we're used to having control over, and all of a sudden things were out of control. And with the constant change, we also lose control, right? So somebody had mentioned constant changing in regard to the pandemic, and that, yeah, we lose control, and things are not what we're comfortable with. And so that also gives us a sense of incompetence, I think, for a lot of people. Be treated unjustly, self-protection. Thank you, everybody, for adding those. So I think that, these are all really worth thinking about, and I think they're very fundamental to the dynamics of when a difficult conversation becomes problematic and unproductive. And that, again, it's important for us to think about these in terms of, is the other person experiencing these fears, these anxieties, and also, am I experiencing them? Because, of course, we're not exempt from that. So you see, my slides are not progressing for some reason. Okay, a minute. There we go. So we want to really be thinking about what meaning each of us is making of what's happening. What do we each see as the implications of this decision or the issue that's at stake? And what do we each see as the threat implicit in the discussion? Is there a threat that one of us perceives that the other is not really perceiving? How might what is said threaten one of our identities? And again, does something that is being said threaten an underlying belief or value? So really, to get inside the brain of the other person, as well as inside our own brain, because even though we're thinking up here, we're thinking, above the water, that underneath, what meaning are we actually fundamentally making of what's going on that's eliciting our anxiety and our reactivity? We always want to be aware of the difference between intent and impact. Again, we come into a conversation, the best of intent, we want everything to go well. What's wrong with them that they're not responding in kind? Well, what is the impact of our words, regardless of what our intent is? And really, in a conversation, yes, we want to know, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but ultimately, what matters? What matters is the impact that it's having on the other person. So we need to work to bridge the gap between intent and impact. We often assume intent based on the impact that it has on us, which the other person does as well. So whatever the impact is, if it makes them agitated, it's hard for them to give us the benefit of the doubt. The natural inclination is to assume that what we're doing is we intend to have the impact that we're having. Unfortunately, our assumptions about intent impact our reaction. Right? And that again goes in both directions. So I am doing something, I have the best of intent, it has a negative impact on the other person because it's threatening their identity, and I'm oblivious to that, some aspect of their identity, or it's threatening, it's in contrast to their beliefs or something like that. And so it has this very negative effect on them. They're going to be annoyed at me because I'm the one who elicited that response in them, even if I have the best of intent. And so the more that I can understand that, the more I'm going to be in a place where I can try to, and we will get to this, about what some strategies are to address this. We all carry baggage. We all carry a lifetime of baggage. The older we are, the more baggage we have, but we all have a lot of baggage. And a person's reactions are a culmination of all of their experiences and the meaning that they have made of them. So if somebody comes into a room and we're having this discussion, they're bringing their whole backpack into the discussion, and so are we. And so whatever reaction they have to us is based partly on what we're saying, but it's also based on what memories, visceral memories, maybe not even memories that they're aware of, but what visceral sensory memories they have that are comments and our questions and our concerns are eliciting in them. So they're bringing in their backpack, we're bringing in our backpack. And so there's a tendency, often, and again, I see this often in schools, that, if there's assumed malintent on the part of one person, of a teacher or an administrator or something like that, people can get extremely defensive. Like, how could you possibly think that? I've never done anything wrong to you, right? Okay, but they're coming in with their entire backpack full of experiences, maybe with white people, maybe with authority figures, maybe with clinicians, maybe with who knows what, maybe with men, maybe with women, who knows what. They have their whole backpack, and whatever you're saying is being put into that context, and that's what they're reacting to. And so we may never actually know what's in the backpack. We may not know exactly why it's triggering whatever it's triggering in them, but to recognize that there's a whole lot there that we don't even know about, and that's contributing to their reaction. So we can only change ourselves. We want to try to understand all these things about our conversational partner, but obviously we cannot change them. We can only change ourselves. But the good thing is that if we change ourselves and something about how we're responding in our behavior, it can in turn change how others respond to us. So that's the beauty. Lead with curiosity. When in doubt, ask a question. So if you notice yourself getting agitated, getting a little tighter inside, breathing a little shallower, and maybe speaking a little faster, and, reacting a little bit more, try to ask a question. Just say, let me just ask something. And ask a question that will help you understand the situation, the meaning that your conversational partner is making of the situation, how they're feeling, whatever underlying assumptions they're making about you or about the situation, or whatever implicit rules that they feel like we're violating in our reaction to them. So one thing to be careful of, and when you're asking a question, you don't want to ask a question about, like, I'm curious what you don't understand, because that's not really asking a question. You want to ask a question that's like, help me understand why you think that will work better. Help me understand what's concerning to you about this. Help me understand you. Not, what can I do to help you understand me? Because that isn't really a question. It's kind of a cheating question. So when we're asking a question, we really want the question to be about them, their thinking, the meaning they're making out of it. Okay, so a few things in the chat that I thought were helpful. Okay. We want to think about where we are in the ladder of inference. So you may be familiar with the concept of the ladder of inference. The idea is that at the bottom of the ladder of inference is data, and data being what we see, what we know, what the objective data. We see this, we know it. I see that my wall is blue. That is data, right? That's what we know, that's what we see. I see that you're smiling. That's data, right? I don't know why you're smiling. That goes higher on the ladder of inference. I could guess, but I could infer, but I don't really know, right? And so we want to, as the conversation starts to get more agitated, we want to bring it down on the ladder of inference. Let's bring it down to the data. What do we see? What do we know? I noticed that we were both starting to raise our voices. Your voice changed after I said blah. Did you have a reaction to that? Ask. I might be assuming, oh, her voice got raised because she thinks this, she feels that. ask. We can't assume things. When the conversation gets agitated, we want to bring it down and we want to check our inferences. Sometimes when people say this, they mean that. Is that what you mean? So if we're saying, oh, I can't believe he used that word, I can't believe he said that. Well, let's check out, is that really what he means by it or she means by it? One thing that I heard you say was, can you tell me more about that? Or even, it seems like we see this really differently. Let's try to understand why we see it so differently. So questions like that really say, okay, when we have these conversations, we're way up here on the ladder of inference. What can I do to bring it down a few rungs and really work with observable data? Another element to be thinking about is what am I trying to accomplish? What's my long-term goal? So a lot of times we go into a difficult conversation and we want to solve the whole thing in that conversation, right? So let's say, you're with a friend, you have very different political views, you want to be convincing them that you're right. Okay, and we have this conversation and we're having this argument and it's getting really heated and we're both like, it's so obvious I'm right and they're so obvious they're right. Well, maybe you are right. I mean, that may be true ultimately, but the fact is that doesn't really matter right now. But if what you want them to do, if you think, well, my goal is really for them to understand my thinking and why this seems so right to me. Okay, so if that's really your goal, that's a long-term goal. Right now, what do you need to do? What you can maybe do is maybe you can identify one article that you feel like, supports your view and just say, I'm just going to send it to them. Let them think about it. You don't have to even follow it or anything like that. Or you could take one element of what you think that you agree on, and you could just say, well, let's find this common denominator. But to think about what's my big goal, push that way out and take little baby steps to getting to where you want to get to, and really have a longer view of it. You could also think that just about building up trust with people, with coworkers, or, you feel like, well, we really don't trust each other. We have a difficult relationship. Well, let's say, okay, in a year, I want us to have a trusting relationship. And again, this happens in schools a lot with, teachers and administrators and parents, or teachers and parents. Push that out a year or 2 years and think, well, what can I do today to increase that level of trust that much? Just that tiny, tiny bit. What do I need to do that? And if we break it down into what we would call benchmarks, rather than really just thinking in this conversation, I have to meet this goal, sometimes that can make it feel more achievable. We want to keep our eyes on the prize. What is our main goal? Is there any consensus? Any starting place where we can agree? So really take a step back and say, okay, we don't agree at the solution that we're talking about, but we agree at what the problem is. So let's step back. Let's talk about where we agree. We agree about this problem, or do we? I mean, that's something else to think about. Do we actually even agree what the problem is? But clarify what aspect we agree on, and then start to work from there. If we go back, if we return to that point where we agree, it gives us more room to move. It gives us more positive energy. It gives us a restart to be able to move forward and talk again, little baby steps about little aspects of the situation to move forward. And we may not get exactly where we want to get, but at least we'll be able to move it forward. And that's the other thing is, even if you can't accomplish that end goal that you are envisioning, can you ultimately, over several conversations, several months, accomplish some of it? And that's some of the question too. What can we do to focus the attention? How can we shift the conversation to focus the attention on whatever aspect of it is common? If our ultimate goal is common, great. Again, like if we're working with, and I can keep bringing it back to schools, but this applies to any place. If, in a school, if we can all say, we all want this child to be successful, the parent, the administrator, the teacher, the school psychologist, the outside clinician, all of us want this child to be successful. Let's step back. Let's agree on that. And then we can take little baby steps. Well, how about this aspect? How about this aspect? How about this aspect? Where can we agree? And then how can we move forward from there? That helps to address the some of the contentiousness and some of the issues of of lack of trust and of assuming malintent or something like that. So, okay, so strategies. As we said, we want to lead with curiosity. When in doubt, ask a question. We want to focus on the other person's point of view. How does he or she feel? What meaning is being made by them? What underlying assumptions are they making that are leading them to where they land? And that often, you know, in the political conversations, that's often a big piece. There's the values piece, but there's also the piece of what assumptions are we each making? Because we may be making different assumptions about safety in the world, what makes us safe in the world, or what makes us, you know, what gives people a good life, or, you know, what matters, or there might be really, you know, fundamental values, but also assumptions that we have that are really different. And to identify those will give you a starting point to work from. Recognize and manage our own reactions. It's a big part. It's easy to focus on the other person. Why are they reacting that way? But it's just as important to, you know, think about our own reactions. Why am I reacting this way? Why am I so agitated by this? Why am I so upset? Focus on common goals or any aspect of the situation that we have in common, that our perspectives are in common, our shared perspectives, our shared lens. Consider saying what is being unsaid. You know, if we do notice our voices being raised, say, I notice our voices are being raised. What's going on here? Take time to respond. I mean, you know, the other thing is there's a pressure in a conversation. And I think this happens a lot when we have conversations with children, with our own children, with, you know, with kids at work, is there's a sense of like, we have to have all the answers right now. I have to think of exactly the right thing right now. Well, you don't. You don't. And, you know, we can just say, let me think about that for a minute, and just sit there and think about it. And that, but, you know, that just, it changes the tone of the conversation. When you just say, I need to think about that. That's interesting. Let me think about that. Or even to say, I'm going to think about that, and let's check in again in a couple of days, and we could talk about it then. So take the time you need. Oops. Oh, wait, I just lost, wait, sorry. Just lost the rest of my strategies. Just a second. Sorry about that. Can you see it? The strategies? Okay. When you feel the tension rising, again, ask a question. Ask a question about them, not about you, yourself. Take the long view, start with small movement, and perhaps most importantly is tolerate feeling a little bit uncomfortable, because when we're just reacting to the discomfort, we can't think straight. But if we say, oh, I'm uncomfortable, notice it. Sit with it for a second, say what's going on for me, and to be a little reflective about that can be very beneficial. And notice what physiological or psychological indicators you get in your body that a conversation is becoming difficult. I mean, everybody's different, you know, and so it's like when we get anxious, we all react a little bit differently. I know what happens in my body when I start to, you know, I start to feel attacked. I start to feel like, you know, they're seeing me with malintent, or that they're threatened. I feel threatened in some way, and I know what's happening in my body. I start to talk faster. I don't breathe as deeply. But we all need to know what are the indicators so that we can notice them when they happen and respond in kind. What can help me react? Me remain calm and clear thinking in these moments. So once you notice it, and this is all CBT stuff for everybody who's done CBT, but it's like, okay, now I see these physiological responses are happening. What are my strategies to take a breath, to ask a question, and to be a little bit self-reflective? Maybe say, I need a minute, you know, let me just think about what's going on here. And really always to be asking, what meaning am I making of this situation? What cognitions am I having that's leading me to have this reaction? Why? What is this? How is this threatening me in some way? those are all my slides, but I'd love to have a discussion and hear what people say. Again, I don't think these strategies are exhaustive. I don't think that, it's the different examples of what triggers people have are exhaustive. So I'd really love to hear where people feel like this resonates for them and where they don't.